Everyone, thank you. Please come and join us. Thank you so much for coming out on, what is it, 111?
Is it?
Better to Visit Maine, which we're going to do this evening. I'm delighted to have Paul Doiron back, and this is his 10th book for Mike Bowditch, who is not only a Maine game warden, but a warden investigator, which is a more unusual role. So Paul has thoughtfully, can you see, or do you want me to move over a little? Has brought us some photos that we can look at about the landscape of Maine and the fauna of Maine. So why don't we start by looking at photos, and we'll talk about your book.
All right. So, in my life prior to being a novelist, I was the editor-in-chief of Down East, the magazine of Maine, which is sort of, it's different from Arizona Highways. It's a private company, but it also specialized in lots of pretty pictures of Maine. And so I brought along a lot of photos from my past life here. This one especially will probably make you feel good. Nice and cool.
Dive into the river. Right?
This is an old mill that has been repurposed into a brewery.
You know, the craft beer industry has really taken off in Arizona, too.
Oh, really?
Maybe it will be a real salvation for some of these abandoned mills in Maine.
Well, in Maine, you can't throw a rock without hitting a brewer. They're everywhere.
So you could do a thing like the Whiskey Trail in Scotland, you know, where you I've done that, and it's really fun, and some of them are only like yards apart.
This is a Bohemian wax wing, I believe. Yeah, it is. A Bohemian wax wing.
Oh, look at that. Oh, wow.
I told you, you're going to get some really top-notch photography.
Where'd you get these?
This was, I have I left the job, but I kept some photos. Just put it that way.
Oh, wait, don't go away. I have to get it. That's just so beautiful. Oh, bad angle there. I love the lighthouse because so often the lighthouse takes up all the space, you know, but in this one it's that gorgeous sky. And the lighthouse is just like an exclamation point.
Yeah, I mean, we really had the best photographers in the state. This is Katahdin. This is our highest mountain in the state, which is nothing compared to what you have out here. It's over 5,000.
There are a number of novels, crime fiction novels set in Maine, where bad things happen on this mountain, and I think
It's kind of a
because it's so high. Yeah.
And it's also, you know, whenever I drove. It's in the northern part of the state. And I drove past it a couple weeks ago, and the thing that I always think about is it's the end of a chain of mountains, but you can't see the other mountains. And so I always think of Tolkien, that this is the lonely mountain, and that there should be a dragon that's perched on the top of it or something.
Right. Is the Appalachian Trail in theory kind of end here? Isn't that the last stop?
It is, yes.
That's what I thought, and that's one reason that if you're feeding people up the Appalachian Trail, which sometimes happens in crime fiction, where you want them to be waylaid by sinister people and all, that the mountain is like the end game of that.
Yeah, and some crazy people actually start there.
Mm. It'll be all downhill. There aren't that many really high mountains along the trail, although because I've done the whole southern part of it.
Maine and New England is the hardest part of the trail. Maybe North Carolina is difficult too as well. But this is a puffin. Now, one of the things that people don't know about puffins, well, there are two things. One is that they're not big birds; they're like penguins. But they were largely exterminated by primarily by people who wanted fishermen who would collect the eggs to eat. And there's been a program to reintroduce them to the state of Maine, so they're back.
And the Faroe Islands, the first time I went there, puffin was like chicken.
Yeah,
people ate fried.
There are
puffins.
millions of them.
I'm serious.
Does it
Yeah.
taste like chicken?
I don't know. I couldn't bring myself to eat
No,
one.
how can you eat that, right?
Right, but I mean, it
Well,
really
it's
was
obviously-
just like a local protein source, you know. These lovely birds. Oh, look at the moose. Oh, that is a great photo.
That's a chocolate-colored moose.
I love the right.
Yeah,
The
they're
net
very,
hanging off it was
they're
terrific.
very aquatic. Come on.
That's a terrific photo.
Oh.
Oops. I don't know how I go back here.
Yeah, that's a little fishing going on there.
Yeah, this is it. This is a. Oops.
Oh, wow.
Look at that. Okay.
All right, back again. So yes, these gulls are eating a squid, as you can see.
Wow, it looks like a deranged carrot.
Oops, I just did this again. Well, that was just another fox.
All right.
There's a crow perched in there. This looks like the cover of a mystery novel, doesn't it?
Yeah, that is sort of Edgar Allan Poe.
Yeah.
Well, this is what the Maine you kind of expect.
The water's beautiful.
I have no idea what this one is.
It's black and white.
Yeah, there's a few black and whites in here. They were contemporary photos, but photographer worked in black and white.
Ooh, that's pretty.
And I should warn you, we could take up the whole time with these photos. I have like 49 of them. I wanted to be you know.
Why is that thing on stilts?
The tides. Maine has the highest tides in the U.S. It's a function of the Bay of Fundy, which is perfectly shaped to create high tides. And actually, New Brunswick has the highest tides in the world. So tides of 20 feet or more are really common. So
That thing looks like it wouldn't stand a rushing tide.
you'd be surprised about some of these old. I mean, it's obvious. Although this building is probably like 5 years old, right?
Yeah, that's one of those famous covered bridges
Yeah.
there. Yeah, beautiful.
I don't know why there's all these winter ones here.
Oh, it's okay. They make us feel good. Where is that?
This. Okay. Where is that? That.
I know it's got a serious fishing pier or something.
It does have a serious fishing pier.
Yeah.
I should be able to place that one.
Well, it's coastal Maine, right?
It's coastal Maine. It looks like. I don't know. It's up like my mountains back where I live, but it's not helping me. This could be anywhere. Now these are weirs.
Mhm.
These are primitive herring traps. The herring would come in with the tide, and they would get stuck in underwater nets that are arranged in this thing. They couldn't get out, and the guys would row out there and pull them up.
Or walk out there.
Or walk out there, yeah. This is Acadia National Park.
It's a really interesting picture because there's no traffic. Most of the time in Acadia National Park, it is truly bumper to bumper.
Yeah, I like this one. This is very Maine. Lots of things could have left to abandoned. If you read my books, you probably know that.
There's another pretty lighthouse picture.
Yeah.
That's great.
This is, I believe this is Seguin Light. I'm not positive.
The spray is terrific. That's
I know.
really great. Was somebody out on a boat doing that, looking back?
This would have been from shore.
It would have been.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
an island.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It looks like a Thomas Kincaid picture.
Yes. Actually, no, it may not be an island because I'm seeing.
I just thought it'd be interesting to be on a boat with all
I'm
that
seeing
going
what
on.
look like some kind of holes there.
Yeah.
So, unfortunately, these things were not labeled. This is actually Portland. Harbor Fish Market is the best fish market on the East Coast. Yes, and the boats come and they just unload the fish right there, and they're coming in the other way. This is Portland, he said. Lots of light outages.
Yep.
That's what people come to see.
Do people still live at these lighthouses, or are they
No.
mostly
No,
automated now?
Yeah, the Coast Guard automated them, and most of them are owned by nonprofits, actually.
Some of them are, in some places, have been turned into like B&Bs or something,
there's-
but I don't know if that's true in Maine. But in California, I think there are some off the coast that are. of while you're looking, a horrible story when we were in Ireland about a lighthouse, and there was a terrific storm, and it broke one of the glass things in the lantern, and they were in a hurry, and they replaced it, but they didn't pay attention to the color. And when they replaced it, it turned into a death trap for the ships because it appeared to be different than it was. And then they had this whole spate of wrecks that resulted from the fact that they had, I can't remember if it was like white and they put red glass in, or red and they put white glass in, or whatever, you know. But I mean, so lighthouses were really not only important, but you know, killer if something went wrong.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I can't seem to advance.
You can't. Patrick, we're stuck. Our tech support and Paul the dog are arriving simultaneously.
Yes,
You could jump up there on the keyboard, Paul.
We bonded over the shared name.
Whoa.
Whoa. There we go. Oh, no.
More aileron rolls.
Yeah, these can't seem to get narrowed up there.
Are the red roofs sort of distinctive to Maine lighthouses, Paul?
They seem to be. I have no idea why they would have been painted red. The red shingles. I mean, the reality of living on the Maine coast is that you need to paint every year. The salt air just corrodes everything. Oh, there we go. Something
We're
happened.
still there.
Oh, we're going
We're going
backwards.
backwards. Right. Okay.
Maybe the fox was midway through or something.
Can we
That's
skip
weird.
one? Well,
See all photos like that.
look at that. We've done all those.
Yeah, keep going. These are, yeah, keep going, sorry.
A little more. There's that one. Okay.
All right, here we go. Great.
That may take us back to the Deadly Red photo.
Oh,
there's
that's
a
a
new
one.
one.
Ooh, that's a one.
Thank you. Yeah, some of these here we go.
Look at that.
Yeah, this is where I live.
Oh,
Not too bad, huh? I actually do not live on that island. But oops, never mind that. Oops. All right.
That's neat.
Yeah, these are already. This is Lewiston, Maine. Lewiston is unusual in that it's a former sort of the biggest mill town in Maine. They made shoes and textiles and this sort of thing. And in the last 20 years, has been the site of a mass immigration of Somali immigrants. There are over 5,000 now living in Lewiston, which is an old French-speaking blue-collar town. And most of these Somalis actually had come from another place in the United States. They came from Georgia and Minnesota primarily.
Minnesota has a huge population of Somali immigrants. So interestingly enough, does New Zealand.
And I think it's, the reputation was that Maine was a pretty good place to be, although, I can't imagine what it's like to go from Somalia to Maine, but they've really gotten a toehold, and it's been a very positive thing, in my opinion, for the state. Oh, I love this. So this is West Quoddy Head Light, which is the only lighthouse that's candy striped that way, like a candy cane, and I have seen lots of wildlife at that. It's the easternmost point in the United States, and it doesn't surprise me that somebody got a porcupine sitting, browsing on the lawn there.
Oh, that's gonna be nice.
Yeah, these are all lobster line ropes and lines. Little lighthouse. This photo looks so pretty, but I guarantee you that the mosquitoes would eat you alive. That's looking across a salt marsh at a stream.
Do you get fireflies at night?
We do, yeah.
What about black flies? Because I remember New
Oh,
Brunswick
God.
being absolutely chewed to death by black flies.
Black flies are something else. This is a peat bog. Yeah, and I think this is the bog in Acadia National Park. And some of those trees, those skinny little trees, are like 300 years old.
Oh.
They grow very, very slowly in the acidic soil of the peat. We have a lot of lighthouses. A lot of people go on lighthouse tours too, trying to see them all. Oops. We lost the arrow. Maybe that's the sign to segue to the book.
Okay. We saw the box at the beginning, right? Well, you can see how magical the landscape is, and it's an integral part, obviously, of what Paul writes about. So, Almost Midnight is your 10th book for Mike. Been an interesting journey, hasn't it? He's had to put up with or survive a lot of misfortune.
Yeah, if you've been reading the series, you've seen, hopefully you've seen him evolve as a character, and there's a backstory that sort of how I've written the series, and it goes back to the first book, The Poacher's Son. I had this idea in The Poacher's Son of this very troubled, damaged person who was deeply in denial, and I thought it was going to be a standalone book. But when the time came to, when I found an agent who was halfway interested in it, she said, Paul, if this is your one and only book, that's fine, that's great, but I'm probably not the agent for you. I represent authors who want to be doing this full time, so tell me honestly, is this the beginning of a series? And I said, yes. Yes, it is. It's absolutely the beginning of a series. The problem that I had was Mike is such a troubled soul, and I thought nobody's going to stick with this guy. So what do I do? Do I jump forward 10 years and have him be mature in the next book? And I said, actually, this might be more interesting to try to sort of write a series about a character who you're watching, grow up personally and professionally in front of you. And that's been kind of my guiding light through the books. And I think you're going to find with Almost Midnight that he's really started to come into his own. I like him. I find him the most likable in this particular book. After I finished, I'm like, he's a good guy in this book. He's come a long way, baby. That has always been the thing I think about with each new book in the series is how does this advance his storyline? In some ways, I think it's closer to maybe what you would think of as a saga, which is that the books are more interconnected than many series books are. A lot of series have, the characters obviously are recurring and things, but each one sort of starts fresh, and there's not much baggage from the previous books, or there's whatever baggage there is minimal. Each of my books sort of begins with the baggage from the previous book, and then kind of goes from there.
I was telling Paul at dinner, I think if this is like a 10-book coming-of-age story, there's been a whole arc about Mike in progressing past tragedies in his life and things that haven't worked and all. And I think you like it because he's kind of come to a resting point at the end of this book. And
Not literally.
No, he didn't die. Right? No spoiler there. Go on. But from here, he can arc off in a new direction, and maybe you didn't realize that's what you were doing, but now that you're there,
yes,
you can see it.
Well, Barbara and I were talking about this. So often a writer does not know what he or she is doing until somebody tells us what we've done after the fact. You have ideas in your head about what you think you're doing, about why you want to write a specific book. In this case, I'd written the previous book, Stay Hidden, was something totally different. I wanted it to be sort of a self-contained book, but I felt after having finished that I needed to have a book that sort of brought back a lot of the characters that people were telling me that they missed. They wanted Mike's friend Billy Cronk has been in prison since Massacre Pond. They want to have some hope for him. When I created this wolf dog Shadow in Widowmaker, I had no idea the amount of mail I was going to get from people who were very interested in what happened to that dog.
So tell us a little more about Shadow, because he's actually a major character in Almost Midnight.
Yeah. So what happened was I got the inspiration for this animal when I visited, just by happenstance, a wolf dog sanctuary in the mountains of New Hampshire. And this thing was hidden away like you wouldn't believe, down dirt roads. And the reason it was hidden away is it probably violated all kinds of different laws. But I knew somebody who lived not too far away, and this person said to me, I have to show you this place. And so we drove off into the mountains, and there was this sort of bizarre valley where this basically one guy who was living in a trailer, smoking himself to death, but he was collecting wolf dogs that are, they're illegal in many places, they're maltreated, and so people would send him these animals, and he had them. I think he took care of them fairly well, but they were in about 1.5 acre cages with trees and things so that they could hide. And what was so interesting about it was the sanctuary was the animals in the sanctuary. There were some of these wolf dogs that you would absolutely swear were pure blood wolves. I mean, they had all the look, and they looked at you like a really wild animal. And I remember there was one, but there was also one in there that, honest to God, looked like a collie. That was like looking at me like, I'm falsely imprisoned. What, why am I here? I don't belong here with all these scary animals. But it was, as we were approaching, we could hear the howls of these wolves. I mean, they were howling like real wolves. And what was really interesting were the ravens were circling over this compound. We have ravens in Maine, not as many as you have out here. And it was just like, because ravens and wolves, go together like peanut butter and jelly.
I didn't know that. Why?
Because ravens, despite how sharp their bills are and how heavy their bills are, they have trouble piercing the skin of certain carrion animals. So they have relied historically on canines to tear open deer and elk and everything else, so that they can then scavenge after.
So they're kind of a cleanup squad,
they're
like
cleanup
vultures.
Squad. Yeah. So anyway, I visited this place, and then years later I said, I have to put it into a book, and so I did, and and by happenstance, this sort of this wolf dog Shadow kind of came out of this thing. But at the end of Widowmaker, I thought his story was over. I thought he was going to be sort of a one-book character, and then I kept hearing from people saying, he'd actually spoiler alert, he escapes and goes off into the mountains of Maine. We do not have wolves in Maine regularly, although they do every once in a while. Somebody will trap one or shoot one. The nearest breeding population is actually across the St. Lawrence River in north of Quebec City, and the St. Lawrence between Maine and northern Quebec is quite wide. It doesn't freeze solid. It's industrialized, so you don't have wolves. They're not typically going to be going back and forth, but somehow they do, and so we do have some wild ones, but not a breeding population of them. So anyway, I sort of felt like, okay, now I have a wild wolf in Maine. Mike Bowditch is unwittingly, going to be repopulating the state of Maine with wild wolves. This one will find a female, and so who knows. But again, people. It's interesting. People, the feedback you get from readers. Some of it, you just sort of shrug off, if it's negative, and other stuff you say, that's an interesting idea. And I began to think, I would like to bring that animal back.
So here he is.
So here he is.
In our book, and he's not alone. Well, he's kind of alone, but there appears to be a female somewhere in the background.
There always is.
Yes. Boy.
Well, this is not Sex with Wolves. That's not how this book goes. But it is interesting to think, that the two of them were out there roaming around. There's also a character in this book. Do any of you remember the big dispute that a guy in North Scottsdale had with all of his neighbors about his property? Remember, he put out signs, and it was really an ugly dispute. And I'll say there's a guy in this book who is a more deranged version, and he really objects to, I'm trying to remember, is it the Amish?
Yeah.
For any of you who are interested in the Amish, Linda Castile will be here a week from Sunday. But the Amish community in Ohio has expanded up into northern New York, or has come from another place, and anyway, now in Maine. And so this guy does not want the Amish and their community and their particular way of life to be his neighbors, and so he's really obnoxious.
Yeah, the Amish are actually, Maine has the fastest growing Amish community north of the Mason-Dixon.
And it's interesting because Maine, we were talking about this, Maine is not a great farming state because it's on granite. It's a really hard scrabble state. If you read other authors, it's very hard to grow things and, to turn it agriculture, and the Amish, by way of life, are agricultural. So I'm not sure how that's working out.
Well, I think that the thing that Maine has going for it is that Mainers tend to let people alone.
Okay.
For the most part, this one man to the to the contrary, my fictional jerk. And I think that's what they found is that it's a place where nobody really.
Well, that part I can understand, but how they're actually going to make a living is the
furniture, a lot of furniture.
Is that what it is?
And there's,
okay.
Other sorts of maple syrup and
Knife making is one.
What's that?
Knife making is
Knife
one.
making, yeah.
Okay.
Don't they grow potatoes there too in Maine?
Maine
Yeah.
is actually
Baked potato country.
we have Maine makes the Kennebec potato is our claim to fame.
Okay.
The Kennebec potato, if you talk to any chef, is the best potato for a French fry.
Oh.
And so the McCain's company is up in northern Maine, harvesting our potatoes and turning them into French fries that are frozen and shipped down here.
I wonder if they make candy, because one of my memories of Maine is coming right across from New Brunswick. There's an old town and a huge candy making operation, and you can tour it. Does anyone know what I'm talking about? It's right on the border. So, maybe with maple syrup and candy and so forth. Also, it just occurs to me, because part of Linda's book has to do with the buggies and the horses and the danger that cars pose, to the, Maine doesn't have probably a huge number of paved roads compared to some other states. And therefore, maybe, the horse and buggy thing works pretty well there.
Well, but it's such a new phenomenon. I think that's in some other places people are more used to seeing signs that that the Amish are out. You know, I'm still surprised when I sort of happen. I mean, they're sort of settled in a handful of different communities, and you'll suddenly find yourself in one, and it's like, wow, where am I?
They have huge families too, so if they settle there, it's likely that there's a great many of them going, because I think their average family is like 6 or 8 kids.
Linda would know.
I'm just extrapolating from Linda. Since I don't have any. If you come for Linda, let's ask her that question, because I don't know for sure. But in the book she writes about Holmes County, Ohio, that's a normal family size, is, you know, anywhere from 6 to 10 kids or something, and they use midwives. And that's another, they don't normally go to hospitals, so sometimes they have families and not all the children are actually, if the midwife isn't registered, the children don't necessarily get birth certificates and all, so sometimes it's hard to know just how big the families are because they're born at home without the paperwork. So, you know, there may be more Amish in Maine than you actually know.
Maine also has a tradition of home burials.
That's it.
Yeah. There needs to be a death certificate, but people are planted in their backyards, and
right with the potatoes.
More than you'd imagine. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, we digress. Anyway, so we have the wolves, and we have the Amish, and we have this very contentious, dangerous neighbor. What else do we have going on in the book? There's a lot going on in this book.
Yeah. Well, there's sort of there's 2 plots essentially in the book. One of which involves Shadow, and then there's one that involves Billy Cronk, Mike's incarcerated friend. And the way that I was sort of seeing them is that they're both kind of wild souls,
scarcely domesticated.
Scarcely domesticated. Although actually Billy is married to one of my favorite characters in the series, Amy Cronk. Every time I get to write an Amy Cronk scene, I light up because she's somebody that, I think, she looks like an uneducated sort of a hick, and she's smarter than, I was reading Maine lingo on the way out here, and I came across something that was like smarter than something or other, but I don't remember it, so I'm clearly not that smart, but she's a sharp one.
She is a sharp one. So Mike rescues Shadow when something bad happens to Shadow.
Yes,
he takes him to the vet, and so all the way through we're not at all clear what will happen to Shadow.
Yeah, I think as you're reading this book, you may be saying to yourself, I don't see how these stories have anything to get what they have to do with each other, and by the end, you will see what they have to do with each other. I'm hoping.
Right. So the other story, Billy is in jail,
He's
and
in
then
jail.
there's some chance that
that he may get out.
There's a prison riot.
There's a prison riot. Yeah, we've had a lot of prison deaths in Maine recently, and it's been something that's been on my mind. We don't have private prisons. This is all state run, but I wanted to explore sort of what being in prison has done on his psyche, because it doesn't do anything good, essentially, for anybody. I don't know that anybody comes out of there, or almost no one comes out of there psychologically sound. But so I've been trying to think of a way to get him out, without him escaping. The van goes off the road as he's being transported to the hospital. Billy is on the run, or sort of something. So I was sort of thinking about what his circumstances were, and saying, what could I do here? So I don't want to give away too much about that piece of it, but.
So Mike is actually, in this book, he's more of an investigator than he is a warden. Right?
Yeah. Well, so that's something that's really important to note. Maine has there are 120 or so, 125 game wardens for a state that is as large as the rest of New England put together, and it's the most forested state in the country. You would think, oh, well, that can't be true. There's got to be, what about Alaska? Well, Alaska has mountains and tundra. Maine has, the most trees per square mile of any place, and the game wardens are the law enforcement, wherever there's no road, which is most places in Maine. but in addition to these district wardens who patrol, which is what Mike has been doing in the previous books, up until Stay Hidden, there are 4 warden investigators, and these are plainclothes detectives. They're encouraged to grow beards because they do a lot of undercover work to bust poaching rings. They investigate freshwater boat crashes. Some drunk person in a speedboat runs over a canoeist. You know, it's the ward investigator who is the detective on that. In Stay Hidden, it was what's called hunting homicide. Somebody gets shot during hunting season. They investigate those. So it's a whole new realm for Mike in that they're different. It's a different way of life, a different kind of investigative thing, and I've been assured by my friend C.J. Box that there are no warden investigators in Wyoming, so Joe Pickett will never be one.
Even though he investigates all the time.
Right? Yeah, he investigates everything. Yeah, anyway. So that's a point of departure that I could have from my friend there.
I thought it was interesting that Mike is really uncomfortable in plain clothes. He misses his uniform, and I can see why that one happened. If you were used to wearing one and that was part of your daily identity and so forth, it would be uncomfortable to be in civilian clothes and out moving around.
I mean, I have a good relationship with the warden service, and I get to do ride-alongs with them in planes and boats and trucks and it's interesting that way. I mean, some of them, boy, if they found out that they got to grow their hair long, they would go in a minute, and others, you look at them and you say, God, they look like cops, because they just really don't want to change that sort of that affect that law enforcement officers get.
So this is all funded by the state. This is a state-run agency, right? Not a federal.
It's all state, yes.
How much of Maine is federal national park as compared to state park?
Almost nothing. Acadia, we have Acadia National Park, and then we have a new Katahdin Woods and Waters National Monument, which was very contentious because it was actually, and if you've read my book Massacre Pond, that was sort of predicting the creation of this national monument. So actually, I was saying to Barbara, Maine is has the least private public land of any state in the nation in terms of again, this is all by per capita or per square mile or whatever, and in fact, it's very difficult along the coast to access the ocean because for 150 years or plus, people have been buying up the coast of Maine and building houses on it, and there's guaranteed access for lobstermen and this sort of things, places to launch boats and that sort of thing. But if you're, it's total. If anybody here has been to Oregon, it's the polar opposite of the coast of Oregon.
Oregon and California both have free coastal access, so you can't. It's the plot of a book that came out in May by Michael Brandman called Wild Card. There's this Russian guy who's bought this big stretch of land in Northern California, and he's trying to keep anybody from using it for access, and of course he's breaking the law in California, so it's really contentious. But I didn't realize that Maine didn't have that kind of. It's so interesting.
Yeah, I mean, this has been one of my real goals with the series has been to share with readers outside of Maine sort of what makes it a unique place. I mean, it is an unusual state. It's not, and also too, there's lots of stereotypes about what Maine is. When you think of Maine, you probably think of lighthouses. You probably think of lobsters. Most of Maine is not the coast. So I wanted to do this, and every once in a while I'll get a letter from Australia or Japan from somebody who's never been even to the United States, and they said, "Geez, I really feel reading your books that I understand this Maine that you're describing." And I'm boy, that's great. I also get letters from people who used to live in Maine who sort of depend upon the books to kind of give them their little Maine fix and remind them of the state. Along those lines too, I also get complaints, from people typically in Maine, and typically they're not Mainers. They're people who have moved to Maine, and they say, "Boy, you're really painting a negative picture of this state." And my response is, "Well, if Stephen King couldn't ruin it, I wouldn't worry about me."
Didn't you tell me that Maine has a huge number of second homes? I mean, we
Yeah.
think of having, this enormous number of winter visitor second homes, but Maine has a summer visitor second home rate that's probably second to none.
Oh yeah, and I think especially in recent years, people have been, can afford to buy second homes. I mean, they're building constantly, and they're in these houses for, a month in the summer.
Right.
So there are some towns that just really close up, and it's amazing because they're beautiful places even in the winter.
Yeah.
But the people who own all the houses live elsewhere. They live in Boston and are
Sure, it's a
outside
big
Boston.
boating culture too, isn't
Yeah,
it?
that's where I live in Camden, Maine, which is a real sort of capital of schooners and windjammers and sailing.
Right. Yeah, Camden and Rockport have museums. There's a lot of artist colonies in Maine, and actually a surprising number of writers
Yes.
who live in Maine, not just you, but a bunch. So where's Paul going next? Do we know yet?
Well, I'm going to.
Sorry, Mike.
And I don't know what that Paul. I think that Paul's going to dinner probably, going to his bed. Mike, he's going to go up to the far northernmost part of Maine, the St. John River Valley, which it's an unusual piece of land because the Acadians, who were the French speakers of Nova Scotia, were expelled from Nova Scotia after the American Revolution by the British, because the British wanted to move the Loyalists, the people who had opposed the revolution, to New Brunswick, to Nova Scotia. And unfortunately they had these French people around, and they needed to get rid of them. And
So they went to Louisiana, a lot of them.
a lot of them ended up in Louisiana, where they became Cajuns and developed some of the best food in the world, in my opinion. I come from the other branch. I come from the branch that went running into the woods of New Brunswick and hid until they stopped exporting French people. But one of these places that people hid was along the St. John River Valley, and so you have this island, this little French-speaking island on both sides of the border, the New Brunswick border and the Maine border. And 20 years ago, this was effectively just one big community. People passed back and forth 4 or 5 times a day. They'd go to the dentist in Maine, and then they'd go shopping in Canada, and people married. The Canadian married the American, and back and forth. And then 9/11 came along and just really severed that community in a way that's even different from what you experience here. Because people can shout at each other essentially across the river. It's like, "Hi, Mom." And so I really wanted to deal with this because it's such a different kind of feeling to be up there. You hear French, which you don't hear a lot in Maine anymore. And even what was even funnier for me, I'd forgotten all about this, is that I was up there, as I said, recently, and the people who speak English in the St. John River Valley speak English with a Canadian accent. So I got a lot of boots. It's about 5 miles to the nearest Tim Hortons.
wrote about Tim Horton today. Today is Canada Day, so they actually
Oh,
wrote a
that's right,
salute
it is
to
Canada Day.
Canada, and I couldn't resist putting in a whole donut display from Tim Horton, which to me, it was really interesting. I first ran into them in Prince Edward Island, but Left Coast Crime was in Vancouver last March in the hotel in Vancouver. Next to it was a McDonald's, and next to the McDonald's was a Tim Horton. You couldn't get near the Tim Horton, and McDonald's had practically nobody in it, which I thought was an interesting, kind of Canadian statement about but you can really lose your mind in a Tim Horton. So, Patrick, could you come back and set this just to be the slideshow, because it got stuck again and we're missing some photos, but I think at this point we could just let them fly by. Right, if you... There seems to be a technical hitch here with but if you could do that, that would be great. We can just watch them flash past.
By the way, July actually has 3 holidays. The first is Canada Day, the 4th is Independence Day. Don't forget the 14th.
Oh, right, La Marseillaise, yeah. Vive la France. Absolutely. I usually sing the Marseillaise, and because I can do it in French, on le 14 juillet. Right? Allons enfants de la patrie, le jour de gloire est arrivé. Contre nous de la tyrannie. Right. It's a great song. Bloodthirsty too. There we go. Okay, we've got the box.
Oh, yes.
That is such a great photo. Oh, look how beautiful that is. Wow. We can just look.
Yeah.
Comment. It's just gorgeous.
Yeah, these are Amish.
Oh, they are.
Yep.
Right. Okay.
Beaver.
Oh,
Is
so
that
a
beaver
dam?
mound in the middle?
It is a
I-
dam.
I-
Yeah,
yeah.
down there is a beaver dam. Right. I read that wolves like to prey on beaver, but
They do.
wait for them to. They can't swim in the water, but they get them at their dams.
They do.
Yeah. Is Down East still being published?
It is, and it's doing fine. I'm happy to say, as somebody who, I got out of the magazine business, and I'm happy with my choice. But obviously, I wanted to see it continue and thrive. And yeah, in Maine we have two species of foxes. We have red and gray,
Okay.
and I would assume you have gray here as well. Gray climb trees.
Hmm.
We do not have many covered bridges. It's New Hampshire and Vermont, and they sort of fetishize covered bridges there.
Ah.
That's their lighthouses.
What was the book about the bridges? Was that Iowa or
That was
something
Iowa,
like
yeah,
that?
yeah.
Or Ohio? Iowa.
Iowa, yeah.
Wasn't it?
What, Madison County?
Yeah, the bridges in Madison County. Right. I really like that photo.
It's true though, you don't see that very.
No.
You see,
They must have stopped the cars and took
Yeah.
the photo.
Property is very expensive in Maine, right?
It is, yeah. I mean, it's really. I know somebody who's an investor, and he's quite well off, and he lives in Marblehead, Massachusetts, which is a very expensive place to live, north of Boston. And he was looking at Maine real estate and said it's vastly overpriced. It's just not. It's not. I mean, obviously, it's worth whatever somebody's.
I
Pay
have a
for it.
friend that she came out here from Maine. She's been here like 20 years, and she wanted to go back.
Oh yeah.
But she
Wanna go.
couldn't even find a place to look at that she could
Really?
afford. So she went to New Hampshire,
Yeah.
and she looked at 35 places there before she found one. Because if she liked it, it was gone before she could even make a bid on it,
Yeah,
or she couldn't afford it.
Well, that's it. I mean, it's so strange because you do have these very expensive houses. As I said, that a lot of them are being purchased as second homes. We have the oldest population in the nation.
Really?
Yes, and we also have a really profound lack of service workers of all kinds. I mean, thriving restaurants have been forced to close because they can't find servers or cooks.
Yeah, well, that's always a danger if you open. It was a real problem up in Winslow when La Posada opened, and the restaurant was to try to find people to work in the restaurant. The other problem with an aging population is medical services, because you don't have rapid access to. We have an author that I edit who lives in Mykonos in the summer, and he's having to rethink it because you can't actually get off the island for medical attention in any helpful way if you have a crisis. So a lot of people who've retired and moved, to remote places and all are finding that as they get to a certain age that isn't working anymore. So that becomes a real problem somewhere like Maine.
Yeah, and I think there are 14 islands off the coast of Maine that have year-round populations of people, and one of them, my wife is especially fond of, Monhegan Island, and there's a sign when you get off the ferry that says, effectively, there is no medical help to be had on Monhegan Island. They have no EMTs at the moment, no doctors unless somebody's vacationing there. So it's really not where you want to have a heart attack.
No, or even medevac. It's hard to maintain a network of planes and all for something like that. Any of you have any questions before we wind up? No? It's been fun to see the photos, hasn't it? And listen to it all. I really, really like this series, and one of the great things about it is Maine. It's just as big a character as Mike and the other people in it. So I'm really glad you're writing it. So I want to thank our Facebook audience for joining us.
Thank you, Facebook.